I'm John Sipher.
And I'm Jerry O'Shea.
Between us, we have over 60 years of experience as clandestine officers in the CIA.
Part of our job was creating conspiracies, like being undercover to deceive our adversaries.
Now, we're going to use that experience to investigate the conspiracy theories everyone's talking about, as well as some you may not have heard.
Could these be true, or are we being manipulated?
Find out now on Mission Implausible. So today's guest is Gabriel Gatehouse. Gabriel is an award-winning journalist and broadcaster who's covered political and military issues and conflicts around the world, from Ukraine to Syria, Libya, and the U.S. He's the author of a book and an excellent BBC podcast series called The Coming Storm that looks at QAnon and the January 6th conspiracies. And the book's subtitle, Gabriel, is A Journey into the Heart of the Conspiracy Machine. Yeah. So, Gabriel, my first question is, can you tell us what the heart of that machine looks like, and is there any surgery that can save it?
It's a strange and dark place, John. The heart of that machine. I mean, in a way, I was slightly doubtful about the subtitle because the heart of the conspiracy machine makes it sound like a conspiracy, basically, that there's somebody there pulling the levers, creating these conspiracy theories to some dark and diabolical end. And in some cases, that is true. But in many cases, you're nodding. I can see you nodding away, Jerry. But in many cases, these conspiracy theories are organic, at least to begin with, and they grow out of what do they grow out of? The malaise of modern capitalism, the paranoid style in American politics, the great knack that you guys in America have for telling a story. You guys just love a story, and the
even if it's wrong.
Especially if it's wrong, right? I mean, it's like, the weirder and more wonderful it is, the more you like it. And that's why you gave the world Hollywood and all of this amazing stuff. But you're kind of now being eaten up by your own infotainment industry.
Yes.
I'm sorry to be the bearer of
that's
bad
enough
news.
for today.
So Gabriel, I have to admit, I am a sucker for a British accent. In fact, so much so that I married one, right? So
would you like me to ham it up for you?
No. I get that at home, right? So
okay. Totally good. Right.
Yeah, but you talked about conspiracies being like an American thing, or you implied that, and of course it is something worldwide, but is there something peculiar about the American brand, or our version of conspiracies, or our willingness or ability to fall for them and propagate them?
Look, of course it's not
just
an
outside.
Of course it's not just an American thing, but like so often, you guys just do it better.
Thank you very much.
Oh, there's a compliment.
I mean, it's interesting to me. I do think it has something to do with this kind of great tradition of storytelling. Americans, as a journalist who's worked all over the world, my two absolute favorite countries to work in are number one, weirdly enough, Pakistan. I love working in Pakistan because people are so, even if they're the type of person who would really ideally like to put you in an orange jumpsuit and saw your head off with a rusty bread knife, they're very kind of open, and they come out with great sound bites, and they just they make great content, if you like. And as an awful word, that content, I take it back. They're just very good for journalists, and Americans are the same. It's a wonderful place to work because even the kind of fully red-pilled, completely objectively bonkers people are usually actually really nice if you come to them with a sort of open mind and say, look, my policy with these people is to go, look, I don't think you and I agree on a whole hell of a lot. I don't believe in most of the things that you believe in, but I am interested in why you believe them and what might lie behind it. And I have an open mind. So why don't you just talk to me? And people are just mostly very kind of generous with their time and their insights. We British are very kind of, we're constantly judging who we might be talking to and what their views might be or what social strata they might come from. And we're fine tuning our, Americans are not like that. They just go for it.
I want to take a shot at the British, though. Just it's John Stewart.
Please do.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a historical tradition.
Yeah. So we have got QAnon and all the craziness with this, and I looked into British conspiracy theories around this, and all I could come up was the voting pencil conspiracy, right? That the pencil provided to you at the polling stations, that somehow MI5 was like erasing it and putting it back, but we have bamboo fibers from China and all the rest of this.
I mean, I've never heard that conspiracy theory, so thank you for adding that one to my.
Well, you have to look it up. Yes.
Well, because you guys had Sharpie Gate. I don't know if you were aware.
We
of
did.
Sharpie Gate, yes.
Yeah.
Sharpie
And you only
Gate,
had a
Arizona.
pencil.
Yeah, we
had
just
pencil.
had pencils. You see, that's what I mean. You guys just do it better.
Well, you guys did Brexit before we did the January 6th stuff or whatever. So
we did Brexit, but Brexit. I mean, Brexit wasn't a conspiracy. I mean, much as many of my liberal friends like to think it was. A lot of people over here think that Brexit was kind of created by the Russians as a psyop or something, which is of course palpable nonsense. We need to look at ourselves and the European Union and why it was that a majority of people decided they didn't like this institution that was giving them all this prosperity.
But they also, the way politics and can be used is people could make simple, perhaps false or largely untrue statements or stories that people would follow and believe. So, I mean, I think even in Brexit, I think they created a narrative that wasn't fully true that people sort of bought into. Now, it wasn't created necessarily from the outside, but it was certainly used by politicians.
Yeah, I mean,
Brexit.
I think to be serious for a moment on Brexit, like both sides did that, right? In the
that's a political thing, yeah.
It's politics, right? You create a narrative, and you hope that your narrative is going to be stronger than the other guy's narrative, right? And unfortunately, a 3-word slogan like "Take Back Control" is a stronger narrative than, well, everything's kind of fine. Well, it's not really fine, but really, if we just don't really do anything, things might get better. So let's just not do anything, right? That's just not a very good narrative. And you see that with Trump and Kamala Harris. Trump has strong messaging. Whatever you may think of him, he's got killer political instincts, and he's got a strong message. Defeat the deep state, you guys.
Yeah. See, in your doing some research on you, I found one thing really compelling that you put across, that the conventions of right and left are they should be thrown out the window, and it's really sort of pro-system and anti-system, right? I mean, those who want to throw the baby and the bathwater out, and those that are looking to reform, or at least sort of like push forward with what we have. So can you give me some more on that? That I find that really interesting.
I think
great way of framing it.
Thank you. I mean, I think, in a way, I wouldn't say this began with the 90s, but I feel like the 90s in so many ways is the beginning of everything that we're at now. It was this kind of weird period of kind of geopolitical stasis, the end of history. You guys had successfully defeated the Soviet Union. Liberalism, yes, very good. Liberalism in all its forms had won, right? Economic liberalism, globalization was in full swing.
Get rid of the CIA. We don't need it anymore, right? Yeah, Russians are good.
Exactly. And I, as somebody who just graduated mid-90s with a degree in Russian, like nobody needed that anymore. Nobody from the CIA or MI6 even came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to work for me?" I spoke Russian for
not
yet. You can do it on this podcast. But so in one sense, it was this kind of moment of political and economic stasis. We'd reached our final resting point, as it were. But in another way, everything was just beginning, right? The internet and the kind of the breakdown of the of consensus and the establishment, sort of fueled by tech. But in a way, the thing that Bill Clinton was so brilliant at was he just occupied such a vast swathe of the center ground in politics that basically to oppose Clinton, you had to be on the fringes, right? You either had to be on the far right, Newt Gingrich kind of throwing out conspiracy theories, as it were. Vince Foster and this White House lawyer who'd committed suicide, and all these kind of tales were being spun around him about how really he was having an affair with Hillary Clinton, and she'd rolled him up in a carpet and left him in a safe house in Virginia and then dumped him in a park and blah, blah, blah. So that was coming from the right. Or you on the left, you basically had to go further and further left to oppose Bill Clinton. So what that set up was this political dynamic, which is now coming back to bite us, which is not the war between right and left, which is the paradigm that you guys grew up in and grew up fighting and that I was born into, but it's the paradigm of the center versus the fringes. And I think what's happened in America, and the polling bears this out, and this came out in the polling before last year's presidential election, even though most polls had the Democrats and Republicans or Trump and Harris kind of on a knife edge, if you look deeper into the polling, I remember there was one extraordinary bit of polling where they asked people about their views of the whole political and economic system in the United States. Did people A, think it was doing just fine? Did they B, think it was doing okay, but maybe needed minor modifications? So those two they were the sort of, it's okay, guys. Like let's stick, but let's not throw these are the baby in bathwater. Keep the baby in the bathwater, people.
Right.
They added up to about 38%. Then there were the people who said, no, the system is really in deep trouble and it needs root and branch reform. Or the people who said, it's so screwed, we should burn it all down and start from the beginning. And that lot of people added up to about 60%. Right now, it's very clear who is the burn it all down candidate here, right? So when I saw that little bit of polling buried right at the bottom of the poll, I was like, he's going to win. He's going to win again. And, and it's clear. And unfortunately, for keep the baby in the bathwater people, a lot of people aren't very happy with the way things are going right now. And because the people who are now in power in your country are so certifiably bonkers, often, even though they quite often put their finger on the problems. They're very good at identifying real problems. It's just their solutions are totally batshit. Am I allowed to say batshit on the podcast?
Well,
yes.
Fuck no.
Good analysis.
Okay. But what's happened is that the Democrats and sort of what used to be called establishment Republicans, but are now, outcasts, have become the party of people who are saying, la, 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 we're not listening, everything's fine, just stop tinkering with the system. And that's not working.
Well, actually, let's dig in a little bit deeper to the 90s thing. In fact, Jerry and I have a company. We're trying to make, espionage TV and movies. And we had a meeting just yesterday with Monica Lewinsky, of all people. So
did you know?
I feel like a connection to this. We haven't talked about any of this stuff, and we probably won't either. But
there's an interesting, can I just say something?
Yeah, please.
So this whole Vince Foster, my sort of conceit in the coming storm was I identified the death of Vince Foster as basically ground zero that led to QAnon and the storming of the exactly. Patient
and
zero.
What Hillary Clinton then called a vast right-wing conspiracy.
A vast right-wing conspiracy, which was an idea that was fed to her by a political consultant named Chris Lehane, who we interviewed for the podcast. Very interesting guy, who then went off to work in Silicon Valley. But the Monica Lewinsky connection is this, that the woman who first kind of tipped off the world to the whole Monica Lewinsky thing was Linda Tripp, who was also the last person to see Vince Foster alive. She was then a White House assistant, and she brought him his lunch. And in all the kind of hoopla around what had happened to Vince Foster, and there was a question of what had he eaten for his lunch, and in one account he'd eaten a hamburger with a side of M&Ms, and in another account There were no M&Ms, and it was a cheeseburger, and he'd removed the onions. And this was like the kind of beginnings of the inconsistencies of the account of Vince Foster's death that people started to pull at and to poke at until it sort of grew into this monstrous conspiracy theory about how he'd been murdered because he knew too much.
And then churches and Jerry Falwell and vast right-wing conspiracists and just regular conspiracists, and everybody jumped onto that bandwagon and moved forward, and we are today.
And the
What
rest is history.
throughput do you see today in terms of those things?
Well, look, I mean, what happened in the 90s was that there were all these batshit conspiracy theories, and there was also an actual conspiracy to create conspiracies. This is kind of getting into the conspiracy machine territory, called the Arkansas Project, right? Which was funded by a wealthy heir called Richard Mellon Scaife, and it was basically sending out people to kind of dredge up the wildest stories from the swamps of Arkansas and put them into print, true or not. And then, the White House obviously would rebut these things, and most of them were kind of wild, but some of them were obviously quite true. And the thing was that the not only the White House, as you'd expect, but the establishment media, for want of a better word, in the 90s, the Washington press corps, the people who had, the press credentials to go to the White House briefing room and all of that, also treated the stories about Bill Clinton and his philandering, and sometimes worse, right? Because let's not forget that, there were worse stories than Monica Lewinsky, which,
yes,
whatever you say about that relationship was consensual. There were worse stories. There was Juanita Broaddrick, who alleged that Bill Clinton had raped her violently in a hotel room in Arkansas in 1978. And the reason people found her account credible was because she never wanted to tell it and was forced under threat of perjury to tell it by the Starr inquiry. And it then got completely buried because it didn't sort of fit the narrative. It wasn't the right... I spoke to Juanita and she said, Starr and his lawyers kept asking her, did anyone ever threaten you to keep quiet about this? And she was like, no. And then they were like, well, did anyone ever offer you any inducements, any money or jobs or anything to keep quiet about this? She was like, no one spoke to me about it at all. And so then they were like, oh, well, we can't do obstruction of justice, so let's just forget about it. The question of whether the president of the United States had violently raped a woman was sort of secondary to the political considerations. And so my through line is that narrative about the Clintons actually being bad people was sort of pressed beneath the surface, right? Because some of the genuinely bad stuff that was sort of credible and worthy of reporting on by serious journalists also wasn't touched because of all the batshit stuff, right? And nobody wanted to be associated with that. As somebody put it at the time, I can't remember who it was, but this is not my phrase, but it's a very good one for the Juanita Broaddrick story. That story was fruit from a poisoned tree, right? Nobody wanted to touch it. And so the stories about how everything was not rosy in the garden were kind of pushed beneath the surface. They germinated beneath the surface of mainstream America. If you got your news from the New York Times or, the nightly news bulletin on NBC News, you would have no idea about any of this. But at the same time, technology was developing. First, it was, talk radio, and then it was the email newsletter, and then it was the kind of full-blown internet. And these stories started breeding like bacteria in a petri dish and growing and multiplying and mutating. And that's sort of the through point. I see it. You can sort of fast forward 20 years and you've got, suddenly a White House reporter in 2020 asks President Trump, I think it's the first time that QAnon ever comes up at a White House briefing. It's a brilliant clip. I mean, if you can dig it out, it's amazing because you can see Donald Trump's political instincts kicking in. The reporter goes, Mr. President, there's this theory that you're secretly fighting a cabal of satanic pedophiles. Does that sound like something you might be involved in? And you can see Donald Trump's eyes going, and he's thinking, is this, what is this? And he goes, well, I don't know much about it, but is that supposed to be a good thing or a bad thing? And he's like,
I hear they like me.
I hear they like me very much. But he doesn't really know what this conspiracy theory is at that time, I'm convinced, but he can sense that it is useful to him and that he can use it. And there were people around him who knew that it was useful to him, and so they weaponized.
So you use the term petri dish, and another interesting thing that you bring up is from the 90s, running with that, is that in 97 a book came out, The Sovereign Individual,
Yes,
and I guess it had an American investor and a British politician with an odd name, Rees-Mogg.
Rees-Mogg. Yeah, you say he's got an odd name, but he's one of the most well-known names in political circles here.
Right. Well, it's a funny name to Americans, right? And he is about Brexit, right? He was one of the, at least, I guess,
well, his
father wrote the book.
His father, right. William Rees-Mogg, Lord Rees-Mogg of something in something, and James Dale Davidson, the investor who's still around, kind of libertarian kind of bent. So his son, Jacob, was one of the kind of preeminent Brexit members of Parliament.
But they outlined what we would today call a conspiracy theory, and the center of gravity of that is very applicable today, right? It's all about tech bros, oligarchs running the world who don't pay, basically describes Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and their impact on how we think and how we, rationality, taxes, government. And I was wondering if you could sort of speak a little more about that as the possible genesis. I guess Peter Thiel had it reprinted, right? In 2020.
Well, it's one of his favorite books. So it's published in 1997. It's called The Sovereign Individual, and it's and the subtitle is so I can't remember now. It's something like Mastering the Transition to the Digital Age or something like that.
There we go.
And it's incredibly foresightful, prophetic even, right? It predicts in 1997 all sorts of things that are kind of come down the tracks. AI, the gig economy, offshore taxing. Basically, they're saying, with the internet, basically at the click of a mouse button, you can move your money from one jurisdiction to the other. Cryptocurrencies, they predict, right? This is like more than 10 years before Bitcoin. And they predict that all of this, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a sort of exercise in crystal ball gazing and sort of political analysis, technological and political analysis. They predict that all of these technological factors will lead to the collapse of the nation state. And the dollar will collapse, crypto will replace it, states will lose their ability to basically carry out the basic functions of any government, which is collecting taxes and providing services. And in their stead will rise the sovereign individual, vastly wealthy and unimaginably powerful individuals whose power, in the words of the authors, will rival that of the Greek gods of Mount Olympus. By the way,
does it mention that they'll be South African? Does it say anything about that?
It does not mention that they will all be South African. Isn't that a weird kink? It's kind of like a weird little wrinkle in the current odd time that we live in, that all these South Africans are taking over. But basically, Peter Thiel, who, I don't know, do we need to introduce Peter Thiel, or are your listeners pretty au fait with? So Peter Thiel was an investor who was, I think, the first outside investor in Facebook. He set up PayPal with Elon Musk at the end of the 90s. And he has been, pretty sort of on the money in certain big trends in tech. He's one of the most sort of powerful and influential investors in Silicon Valley. He also is of the right. He was editor of I think it was called the Stanford Review when he was at Stanford, which was this kind of right-wing student newspaper. And he has, with his money and power, has sort of pursued that interest deep into the kind of meme warriors of the far right around 2016, when he was kind of one of the lone voices in Silicon Valley to come out and back Donald Trump. And, was really hanging out with these strange characters, creatures of the internet, bloggers with names like Mencius Moldbug, whose real name is Curtis Yarvin, and who is very, very influential in Trump circles. He's the sort of the intellectual backbone, if you like, of Trumpism and Vanceism. And he, the kind of, he's dreamt up this idea of this neo-reactionary movement where democracy in America is dead, and what America needs is an American Caesar to cross the Rubicon with a will to power, and all this fuddy-duddy nonsense about people having a say in things. Get rid of all of that and just dictatorship, or as he likes to call it, monarchy. So Peter Thiel was very much kind of swimming in those circles, and he loves The Sovereign Individual. This book, he says, is one of the most influential books he's ever read, and it's hard not to read that book and look at what's going on now and not conclude that what Peter Thiel and others like about Donald Trump is not so much that he's a disruptor, in the terms of in parlance of Silicon Valley, but he's a wrecking ball, right? He's a bulldozer that you can drive through the whole establishment and accelerate your way into this bright or dark future of sovereign individuals, where democracy is basically dead, and power resides with these hugely wealthy tech barons.
But to follow up on the Thiel seeing and sovereign individuals seeing Trump as a wrecking ball, Elon Musk seems to fit into that too, because it's a view of the future where these very important, rich, often white people will take over, but there's also this view that the government just takes care of the weak people. We need to get rid of the weak people. We're eventually going to go to Mars anyway. So does it go further? What's your sense of where these people are going? Because I don't know if Donald Trump is actually onto the same. He may be a wrecking ball, but I don't know if he's thinking of the same future that they are.
I mean, does Donald Trump?
I know
the future, or does he like? I think Donald Trump. I think he's an amazing politician, right? But I think he's entirely self-orbiting, right? That the only values and priorities he has are the kind of here and now popularity, wealth, clout of Donald J. Trump. So there's no. I don't see him as having any sort of. He's not an ideologue. He doesn't have any ideological dog in this fight other than himself. But there is a kind of wing of the MAGA movement that I think is led by people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and J.D. Vance, who's one of their kind of creatures.
David Sachs,
another South African, etc., who genuinely believe that in the vision of the sovereign individual, and that it's coming, and that they can accelerate its arrival. And these people. So I for the podcast and for the book, I spent a bit of time with a bunch of tech guys in something called the network state movement. So they basically what they want to achieve is the kind of breakdown of the nation state, and instead there'll be network states, a bit like, so you'd be able to like choose your citizenship the same way as you choose your gym membership. You know, you look at what they offer, where they have their branches, and you go, well, this fits with my needs and values, and off you go. But they go a lot further than this. So, you know, the networks, like, where is the new frontier, right? There is no more frontier. There's no more virgin land on the American continent, other than Greenland, of course. Cyberspace is a frontier that they can control, but also the cosmos is a frontier that they can go out to. And a lot of the thinking behind the sovereign individual comes out of a movement that I think is very, very little known and only ever had a few hundred adherents. It's called the extropy movement, the extropians. And it was this sort of radical techno optimist movement that flourished in California in the 90s, who, again, much like I think the authors of The Sovereign Individual were very much getting their ideas from this email list, the extropian email list. But they were talking about all this stuff, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented intelligence, augmenting human intelligence, merging humans with machines, cryonic preservation, and eventually, conquering the cosmos. And I think when you speak to these people, as I have done, and you hang out with them, and you kind of get them to talk as they do when they're amongst themselves and not in a sort of combative interview situation, they will openly talk about how, you know, technology is going to lead in the next few years to a very, they use the word Darwinistic moment, where basically, the way they see it, the weak will be culled and pruned from the earth, and the strong will inherit it. And it's a very, to me, a very dark and bleak vision of the future, but these guys fucking love it.
Well, it's very South African apartheid, eugenics, Nazi-ish sort of thing, isn't it? The master individuals.
Well, yes. Let's not forget that the Americans were practicing a form of that until
we certainly were.
Quite recently.
But Gabriel, let's go from like Olympus.
But my point about that wasn't the point scoring, but my point about that is that it's actually quite a sort of quintessentially American vision,
stuff,
right?
Yeah. Eugenics started in the U.S. Yeah, absolutely. No. So let's go from the Olympic heights to idiocy, right? So you have also interviewed or interacted with, is it Jacob Chansey, like the QAnon shaman? Right. Yeah. And who I guess describes himself, or has described himself, as a bodhisattva, a being destined for a higher reality. He's sort of above us. He's also, I think his lawyer has claimed he's a schizotypical.
You got to speak into
that he has a schizotypical personality disorder. Right. And so what is it like? What was it like talking to the QAnon shaman? What was his?
So I first met this guy, Jacob Chansley, the QAnon shaman, whatever you want to call him. I first met him in November 2020, 2 months before the storming of the Capitol. No one knew this guy. I was in Arizona. I was just after the election, and I was there to report for BBC television on this kind of nascent movement called Stop the Steal. This conspiracy theory that there was a big conspiracy to steal the election. And I'm standing, and I was a TV journalist at the time, right? And television journalism is as much about the visuals as it is about the journalism, sadly, often. But that's the case. And I spot this guy, and he's draped in furs, he's got horns on his head, and he's carrying a sign that says "Q sent me." So I'm like, I'm going to go talk to that guy. He looks brilliant. I sent my cameraman off to go and get some GVs, we call them, general views, just sort of bit of scenes of the crowd. So I go off and chat to him. And he's very friendly. He's a thoroughly nice guy. But the story he's got in his head is pretty bonkers, right? He believes that a cabal of satanic pedophiles, possibly led by Hillary Clinton, has captured the levers of power and are now running afraid of Donald Trump, who threatens to expose them, and so they're stealing the election. And he basically talking to him was like it was like he'd eaten an encyclopedia of conspiracy theories for breakfast and was now kind of regurgitating them in random order. So there was bits about JFK and tunnels under the desert and just like a whole load of weird stuff. And I must emphasize this. He was an absolutely lovely guy, right? He was not aggressive or mean in any way. He was genuinely open with me and telling me all about his really weird ideas. And I thought about it and I thought, this guy does look fantastic. But how irresponsible would it be for an establishment journalist working for a serious news organization to give airtime to this nonsense? I draw the line. I have my principles and I will stand on them. So I said, thank you, sir. And I did not film an interview with him. Much to my absolute regret, when 2 months later I was sitting in London and all the TV screens around the BBC headquarters were, focused on one thing and one thing only, and it's the Capitol and the mob is storming it, and then we cut to the Senate chamber and there he is, the same guy with the horns and the furs. And I remember my cameraman was there. He was like, was that not the guy was that the, I was like, oh my God, it's that guy. Did we? Oh no, we didn't. Oh fuck. There's nothing like the kind of the FOMO of the foreign correspondent who's in the wrong place at the wrong time, or even worse, who was in the right place at slightly the wrong time and made the wrong decision and now doesn't have the scoop. Right. So, but also I then realized, when I thought about it, that actually perhaps my mistake was more than just a kind of one of missing the scoop. But I hadn't listened to this guy properly. I hadn't heard the story that he told me about the cabal of satanic pedophiles and asked myself, now, why does that seem true to him? And why does it seem true to so many other people, it turns out, in the United States? And that really was the question I was trying to answer with The Coming Storm. And I think, in a way, like we were talking about the horseshoe and how kind of left and right, the left and right extremes had sort of joined each other. A lot of what Jacob Chansley was talking about was extremely kind of from the left, right? He talks a lot about how, the 0.1% have sewn up all the resources in under global capitalism, and they're kind of throwing crumbs and making all us little people, just turning us into mindless consumers, and all this kind of quite left-wing stuff. As well as these kind of very right-wing talking points about pedophiles and whatnot. But I think the kind of conclusion I came to about this particular conspiracy theory was that if you took it literally, which is that Hillary Clinton was leading a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles from the basement of a pizza restaurant in Washington, D.C. that didn't have a basement, then you're like, well, it's obviously nonsense. But if you took it as a sort of parable or a metaphor, and you heard that story and you understood it to mean that people felt that their democracy had been hijacked by more powerful people whom they hadn't voted for, that the people that they could vote for every 4 years or 2 years weren't necessarily the most powerful people. The more powerful people were people who were sort of in the shadows running big financial corporations or whatever, and they were taking decisions that weren't necessarily always to the benefit of the little people. Then you were thinking, okay, well, maybe they got a point.
Well, let's stay with Stop the Steal for a little bit longer, because, as you know, Jerry and I were part of the Dirty 51 who signed the Hunter Biden letter, and you met, I think, with Ivan Raiklin, right? Who was the self-declared Secretary of Retribution, who was supposed to rake us over the coals and kill us and things like that.
Sadly for him, he never got the call, did he?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. No. I suppose there's still time. I mean, you have to be pretty batshit not to get the call from this administration.
But you did meet him, right?
I did meet him. Yeah, so I did meet him.
What's your impression?
I met him with General Mike Flynn, another fan of yours, at a it was a screening for Mike Flynn's film, which was modestly entitled something like "Expose the Truth, No Matter the Cost," or something like that. Which is a funny sort of a subtitle for a sort of conspiracy theory film. But so I was in the corridor of this university building in Charleston, West Virginia, waiting for Mike Flynn to emerge from the little side room where he was talking to people, and but he had Reichland with him in tow. It was like a sort of sidekick who had this. It was like a traveling circus. They were on a bus and they have this kind of 40-foot long whiteboard, like a wall of crazy, with post-it notes and like a typical kind of conspiracy theorist's wall, like post-it notes, articles. You guys were in their circle, little bits of arrows and red arrows. And
Hope you use good pictures of us, Jerry.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I don't have a picture in there. Yep.
And he was outlining this incredibly complicated web of power of the deep state, in which you guys were, I'm sorry to say, only a relatively small cog.
Yeah, we're small cogs. Yeah,
small fry. So you were there by virtue of this letter that you wrote to Politico as former intelligence officials,
and we failed to monetize it too. That's the real shame.
Yeah.
This is like if we're gonna be dragged and killed by one side, we ought at least make money in the process.
To be clear, we didn't write the letter. We just read it and that makes sense. And
you read it?
Yeah. I did actually.
I mean, there's the letter itself, as I'm sure you've pointed out ad nauseum, it doesn't actually say that the laptop was Russian disinformation.
No.
But it does. On a cursory reading, it certainly does give that impression. So my being a diligent sort of a fellow, I actually found a guy who had a copy of the laptop on a drive, and persuaded him to copy it for me, which he then duly did. And I then had a good rummage around in it, and fact-checked a few things and double-checked a few things. And like everyone else who had a rummage around in it, couldn't find any evidence of it being Russian disinformation. In fact, it looked very much like Hunter Biden's laptop. But I have to say, in your defense, that I first heard about Hunter Biden's laptop at around the same time that I met the QAnon shaman. In fact, I think it was like literally 2 days later. I was at a Stop the Steal gathering in Atlanta. I think it was the steps of the Atlanta Capitol. And I was asking another woman who had a Q sign, and I was getting her to try and get her to explain what this Q thing was that I knew nothing about. And she said, "Well, yeah, but what do you have you heard about Hunter Biden's laptop?" And I was like, "No, what about Hunter Biden's laptop?" And she explained how Hunter Biden in a crack cocaine haze had left his laptop in a repair shop in Delaware, and that the laptop itself contained evidence of the Biden crime family and their misdeeds. And I was just like, oh, for God's sakes, I don't have bandwidth for another conspiracy theory. And I just ignored it, right? So I understand why people thought that this was Russian disinformation or just a conspiracy theory. But unfortunately, a bit like the sort of the Clinton sexual stuff, some of the Clinton sexual stuff, this one turned out to be true.
Well, we never said it was disinformation.
No, I know you didn't. You
we just said it was.
You said it looked like it.
The timing of it coming out was and how it could be used by.
Well, of course, the timing of it coming out was Rudy Giuliani and Steve Bannon. That was them,
right.
Who had just been in Ukraine talking to
Russian Russian
Russian
intelligence office.
officers and was warned specifically by the FBI that that's what he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, look, you could take it that way, and I got to know Chris Steele quite well, the author of the Steele dossier during all of this, and I met him the other day actually, and I was needling him a bit, and I was like, "How are you getting on finding that P tape?" And he, he still believes there is a P tape. I kind of feel like we would have seen the P tape by now, or
would we have though?
So Trump does talk a lot about how the world thinks we're fools and we're taking advantage of us and laughing at us. So you've been a journalist around the world, all sorts of different places, right? The Middle East and Europe. And how does the world look at us now? I think they are laughing at us. My British relatives think we're like knucking futs right now. But so the Germans and the Russian. What's your sense of how we are viewed now since January 20th?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if we were laughing at you from 2016 or 2017 to 2020, we're not laughing anymore. Shit's getting real now, and I honestly think the serious answer to this question is I think that most European countries and governments, whatever they may say in public about special relationships and strongest relationship ever between Britain and the United States and work with Trump and blah blah blah, we know it's over. We know that the arrangement that lasted from 1945 until 2025 it's done. It's cooked. You can't, all you had to do was watch that scene in the Oval Office with Zelensky being pummeled and stabbed in the back and in the front by the country that he thought it was its ally. And, the complete unpredictability of the Trump administration and those around him. And, whatever your emotional attachment to America, and I think there is a deep love for America, certainly in Britain and, many, many other European countries, common sense says that you cannot rely on that as an ally. So you have to cut yourself loose. You've got to stand on your own 2 feet. Donald Trump says we've got to stand on our own 2 feet, and he's achieved that. We're gonna do it. I'm very sad about it. I feel very, very sad about it because I'm a big Americaphile, and I think you guys have been not an unqualified force for good in the world over the past 80 years, but you have been a force for good in the world. You've also been a force for a lot of fuckwittery, but
he took over from the British after many years of fuckwittery.
You really did. You really, really did. And I think I kind of, sitting here in Britain, it feels like, because we kind of said goodbye to our empire with barely batted an eyelid. It was just sort of pretended it never happened. And we sailed straight into the special relationship. And it kind of feels like now is the end of the British Empire that we continued vicariously through you guys. When I kind of began my journalistic career in the BBC's Russian service, where we broadcast the truth or propaganda in Russian to the former Soviet Union, and I remember thinking at around the time of the Iraq invasion and the kind of the fuck up over the weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, and when it became kind of clear that no one really cared about the weapons of mass destruction, they were just going to do it anyway. And I remember saying to a colleague back then, I was a very green journalist, I said, I think that the United States of America is going to become a rogue state in my lifetime. This was, at the point where George Bush had coined the word rogue state and axis of evil. And I remember thinking, I think these guys are going to join them. And guys, You have.
Oh, how are we going to be? Can I go to a softer question?
Fuck.
No, I think it's true, and I'm sad about it too. I have to say.
Yeah, no, we're not wearing the white hat anymore. And with our fuckwittery or whatever you called it, at least we tried to be a force for good, right? Even if we've like got it wrong, right? And I don't think we're trying it anymore, right? It was like,
no,
for as awful as Iraq was, and I spent like years of my life there, like trying to make it right. But it was like, at least if you listen to the neocons, it's like, we'll bring democracy to Iraq, right? We'll remake the Middle East. It was silly and foolish and gone. It had nothing to do with WMD, but
it at least had the pretense of some kind of arc of history bending towards justice.
Yeah. That's
we want the best for them.
That's over. That's over.
It is. It's over.
But yeah, how to come back from that? Jesus, I unfortunately agree with you. But there was one thing I really wanted to ask you. I found it fascinating that you were talking with or interacting with a professor of folklore. And he had some AI tool or machine that could extrude folklore, genuine conspiracies from conspiracy theories. And of course, there are conspiracies to create conspiracies. So they're all, conjoined and so forth in a lot of ways. But how did that work? I mean, my sense was he wasn't able to do it, right? That they're so tightly interwoven, conspiracies and conspiracy theories, reality and irreality. So what was your experience with that? And how well did AI do?
He was, first of all, this guy had the most fantastic name for somebody who's trying to untangle the tangled thread. His name was Tim Tangolini. I'm a great believer in nominative determinism, and I think Tim Tangolini, with his AI program to untangle real conspiracies from conspiracy theories, is just perfect. Yeah, so he and his students had built this bit of software, really, that tried to use machine learning and AI that he claimed could tell a real conspiracy from a conspiracy theory. And so he trained his machine on two events. One was Pizzagate, which was the kind of progenitor of QAnon, which was based in the Washington DC pizza parlor, out of whose basement the pedophile cabal was running the world, even though they didn't have a basement. And the other one was something called Bridgegate, which was a very boring and complicated story about Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, whose people decided to create a massive traffic jam in order to get back at some political rival, but blamed it on something else. But it was an actual conspiracy to create a traffic jam, and the case was solved by dogged local journalists talking to sources and getting documents and doing the things that journalists do. And they finally managed to stand up the fact that this was an artificially created traffic jam designed to hurt a political rival. And what they basically said was, what this program came down on, and in a way, this is common sense. You don't really need AI for this. But Tim Tangolini basically said that if you take Pizzagate and you take one element out of Pizzagate, which is that emails between John Podesta and his staff talking about pizza were in fact code for child sex abuse. Like, if you took that away, the whole story made no sense at all. Like, the whole thing collapsed like a house of cards. Whereas with Bridgegate, like, you could take away one element, like one source or element of it, but the rest of the evidence would still be so overwhelming that the story was very hard to knock down because it was very robust. And that was kind of the basis for his program. The reason I'd called him up was because I felt myself kind of beginning to think like a conspiracy theorist. I was beginning to think, I'd read The Sovereign Individual. I'd looked at what was going on in contemporary politics. I'd looked at the people who said they wanted to destroy the nation state. And I'd looked at the fact that the people who really kind of wanted to destroy the nation state and who were kind of funding Trump, e.g. Peter Thiel, and people like that, loved the sovereign individual, and it was their kind of manual. And I'd also noticed that the people who had been spreading conspiracy theories about the Clintons back in the 90s, which was my kind of starting point, were involved with writing The Sovereign Individual. And so I was starting to, I was putting Post-it notes up on my wall, little bits of string.
Beautiful mind.
Exactly. And so I called up Tin Tangolini and I said, can you please pull me out of my rabbit hole? And so he said, okay, fine. Just lay it all out for me and I'll stick it through my machine and it'll tell you whether it's a conspiracy or a conspiracy theory. And he put it all through his machine and it went, wah, wah. It's a conspiracy. So I was like, oh, fuck. Now I've got to, shit. Now I've got to go deeper. Right. So I started digging deeper and I did feel for a while like I was turning into a conspiracy theorist. This is what like the Trumpies call this not QAnon but Blue Anon, right? Have you heard this phrase? Blue Anon, right? It's what when the libs throw QAnon at a MAGA person, they throw back Blue Anon. Blue being like the Democrats, right? And so and what are the conspiracy theories that Blue Anon people believe in? Well, that Donald Trump was a Russian agent, for example, that there's a P-tape, Compromat, the Steele dossier, and all of that kind of stuff. So I was kind of, worried that I was becoming Blue Anon, and I kind of digging deeper and deeper. And at the end of the day, like, was there a conspiracy in the 90s to start seeding conspiracy theories about the Clintons with the aim that eventually 25 years later, it would lead to the storming of the Capitol and the downfall of the nation state and the collapse of the dollar and the rise of crypto and the sovereign individuals? Of course not. That's just like nonsense.
Gabriel, this goes back to your beginning where you say a lot of them are organic.
Right.
But what happens is, like if you go into QAnon, right? So there's, you talk about in your series, Ron Watkins in the Philippines and Q in Arizona and these things. And it looks like it comes together organically, but then there's a non-organic piece where people like Jason Sullivan and other people see that it's a conspiracy theory, then weaponize it through software to promote it on Twitter and other social media campaigns to help a political campaign. So there's an organic piece that eventually is grabbed by others.
Exactly.
For political
and
purposes.
I think it's
accelerated.
And used, right? And I think that's definitely what happened. And you mentioned those names, Jason Sullivan and people who worked on the campaign, and very, very knowingly and wittingly thought this possibly likely organically created conspiracy called QAnon could be useful to us. So let's just use it. This is politics. But I think the same thing holds true for the whole kind of Russia meddling thing. I know, like both here in Britain over Brexit and in America over Trump's first election, there are a lot of people who are holding on very tightly by their fingertips to the idea that it was really all the Russians and everything was fine in the land of milk and honey that is the United States of America until the Russians started coming in with their nonsense. Now, I spent a lot of time in Russia with Russians, and there are some very clever people there. They're not that clever. And what happened in 2016 was, yes, the Russians had the troll farm. And yes, they were weaponizing divisions in American society and doing it quite effectively. But those divisions were there, and they were organic, and they were real divisions. They hadn't been plucked out of thin air by the Kremlin. And my strong feeling is to keep harking back to the Russians it means you don't look in the mirror and you don't go, why the fuck have we ended up in this place, right? You could just go, oh, it's the Russians that did it. And that is a sort of, you are, what's the word? Your responsibility is to, not you guys, but one's responsibility is to look at yourself and your society in the mirror and try and figure out where you've gone so wrong, not to kind of point the finger at somebody else.
Fair enough. Very true.
I understand now that your book is out, and it's one, I guess it was up for an Orwell Award, and so what are you doing now to stay sane? Are you detoxing from
Stay
conspiracy
sane. He's got to
theories?
get sane again.
Yeah, he's got to get sane. Yeah. To get back to sanity. So are you like leaving this world for a bit to try to like get away from it, or are you going you splunking deeper down the rabbit hole as it gets worse and worse?
I'm popping blue pills like crazy in the hope that they'll counteract the red pills I've had to take. Well, John knows what I'm doing.
A new podcast.
It's a new podcast series, and I absolutely wanted to do what you suggest, Jerry, which is I wanted to have no more to do with any conspiracy theories or anything to do with any of that madness. And then I came across this crazy story about football and the CIA in the 1970s. And
it's like Wind of Change, but
it's like Wind of Change, but soccer.
British football, not American football.
No, British. Sorry, soccer. Yes, yeah. British football, but it all takes place in Mexico in 1970, and where the CIA behind a bit of chicanery that meant that England lost a match and Brazil won it. So if you guys know anything, just feel free to drop me a line. I have found out some interesting stuff that we can talk about once I stop recording. So I'm doing that. I'm also, and now you can see how badly I'm failing at getting away from conspiracy theories. Super interested in UFOs. Because, or UAPs, as they've now been renamed, because, if you say the word UFO, you're immediately put in the conspiracy loony bin. But this administration, for all its failings, does at least seem to have a sort of crazy drive towards radical transparency. They're just like declassifying everything. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but they're declassifying and amid all the kind of JFK files and RFK files and MLK files, they're also apparently a drive to declassify the UFO files, right? Have
you talked to our former colleague Jim Semivan yet?
I have not, and I should.
You want to dig in a hole? That's a good person to talk to.
Jim Semivan.
He's tied to that To the Stars Academy. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I've heard of that. I'm just at the beginning of my UFO journey. I'm just going to scribble that down right now. Jim Semivan. Has he gone down the rabbit hole?
Yes, but he's an interesting. Yeah. I don't think he's not nuts. I don't think. I mean, I don't know that I agree with things that his conclusions and stuff. But
it turns out that UFOs are real, right?
There are unidentified.
Yeah, there's things that are unidentified.
There are things that are unidentified, right? So yeah, it's like not everything is explicable. Sure.
Right. There are things that fly that are unidentified, otherwise known as unidentified flying objects. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Religion.
Well, that's a good starting. It's a religion. This is very interesting. Lots of these things are new religions. But anyway, it does turn out apparently that you guys and the Pentagon and various other agencies have been taking this shit seriously for quite a long time, while pretending that you weren't taking it seriously.
Well, I can say that Jerry and I have if we took it seriously, they never came around to us.
Okay, well, good. So in an effort to get away from the bonkersness that is American politics, I've taken refuge in UFOs.
Maybe
You're
slightly more
hopeless. In other words.
sane.
It's too bad. Yeah. He was quite a guy back in the day.
Okay.
But seriously, we spent a lot of time. So thank you. Let me thank you. Then we'll talk a little bit after
Sure,
we
sure.
cut off here. But really appreciate you coming out with us. What's unfortunate, we keep having these conversations at the end, like Jerry and I are beaten down, like, oh, where are we going? Where's the optimism here? I'm not seeing it.
Well, the optimism. I have something for you here because everyone keeps asking.
Please do.
Everyone keeps asking me this, and so I've come up with something. It's a little tenuous, but here it is. Bear with me. Right. So I believe that we are experiencing the beginning of a period of epochal change, the likes of which we haven't seen for about 500 years, since the printing press, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, gunpowder revolution, blah, 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 all of that stuff. It's a sort of once in a half a millennium epochal shift. And we are naturally feeling very nervous about like the crumbling establishment and institutions and all the certainties that we've taken for granted just kind of crumbling all around us. So what I do in these moments of existential dread is I think myself into the mind of a 15th century German peasant who is tied to the land and sees the printing press coming out and Martin Luther nailing his things to the door jamb.
Theses.
And his diet of worms or whatever it was. His things.
The diet of worms.
Yeah, the diet of worms. And he's wringing his hands over the death of the feudal order. And he's like, how is the world going to function once we're no longer tied to the land and the monasteries don't provide for all of our alms and what healthcare remains if you can figure out the four humors and all of that. And he's going, oh, whoa, no, please, can it just all please just go back to how it was? But then, they have a lot of wars and lots of people die and lots of witches get burnt, but they get the Enlightenment and democracy and science and they go to space and they, all this kind of amazing stuff. So I think we're at the beginning.
So we're in the witches part of that.
The witches, yeah.
That's where we are.
We're in the witches part, right. We're in
beginning of the witches part.
Yeah, that's how I began my whole series as well, witches. But yeah, so I just think we're at the beginning of a very turbulent but also very interesting period that may, if we don't all kill each other or fry ourselves, may lead to some unexpected and amazing developments. Will my children, when they're my age, they're now quite young, still be living under the same system of parliamentary democracy that I grew up under? Or will their children? Probably not, right? I just think nothing lasts forever. Is it going to be bad? Probably. Is it also maybe going to be better in some unforeseeable, unfathomable way that I can't even imagine? Probably.
All right, we'll take that. Although Jerry and I are old, so we're kind of not really great for us.
Right.
Well, so here, this is where you need to join the extropians and take yourself to Scottsdale, Arizona, and have yourself cryonically frozen so that you can then be reawakened in the future utopia.
And if space aliens, if you're out there, like, we need some help, right? It's time for them to land on the White House lawn and like give us a cure to cancer and shit like that. So
here's hoping.
Gabriel, this was really fun. It was a great guest.
I've enjoyed it a lot.